It's over! Be still.
There will always be another. Just like me. There is always another tragedy.
I said, be still. Hello, friend. Are you ready to try again? We'll do better this time.
What's up, Wastelanders? This is Three Dog Bow Wow, and you're listening to GNR. That's Galaxy News Radio, in case you forgot. And here's me with the news. For those of you not in the know, to the northwest of Megaton is this vault, Vault 101. Now, believe it or not, this one's still got people living in it. And every few years or so, someone comes scrabbling out. Well, wouldn't you know it, someone's come out of it again. And, I kid you not, he came to visit yours truly right here in the studio. Now this cat, James is his name, had been in a hole for years. He needed to know what was what out here in the beautiful capital wasteland. So I, the great and powerful Three Dogs, set my brother straight. I told him what was what, who are the winners, the losers, the movers, and the shakers. So if you see James out there, you say hello. Be kind to our new brother, and show him that here on the outside, we always fight the good fight.
If you're not familiar with the franchise, the Fallout games are about exploring a desolate post-apocalyptic world. It's full of monsters, radiation, villains, and explosions. It's a dark world out there. Three Dogs radio station, Galaxy News Radio, is one of the few things you can listen to so as not to be alone with your own thoughts while walking around the wastes. Long periods of delightful jazz music brings levity to your gaming experience, and then this is punctuated by Three Dogs' charismatic news alerts. Despite the fact that Three Dog doesn't actually repeat that particular line very much, the idea of fighting the good fight always stuck with me. It seems to indicate that Three Dog knows what the good fight is, and that by you listening to GNR, you know both what it is and you're participating in it. And it's obvious, isn't it? You're the hero here, the protagonist. It's a splash of hope and optimism in an abysmal world. But for me at least, this extends beyond whatever adventures I get myself into. I've always imagined myself, and still do, as fighting the good fight out here in the real world. By now, you've likely noticed the small little thing in the bottom left of the screen obscuring things just a little bit. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. It's there. We're stuck with it. I do see it. I don't care enough to redo the whole thing to fix it. So just pretend it's not there and we'll all have a good time. Obviously, most of us see ourselves as protagonists in our own narrative, but some of us see ourselves as the hero as well, fighting against our inner demons and our outer failings. It's not been uncommon in my inner monologue to portray myself as such. Games like the Fallout franchise or other RPGs allow us to be whoever we want while we're playing and make choices as that person. Usually when I play, I do it as just a sort of idealized version of myself, a goody two-shoes, a white knight. Games like these give me a chance to feel like my actions mean something and my choices impact the larger world. I wander the wastes, bringing as much light as I can. I'm out there fighting the good fight and making differences. In a lot of cases, not just games, the media I consume is a reflection of this desire. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a huge fan of the novels written by Brandon Sanderson and what he calls the Cosmere. A consistent theme in his series, The Stormlight Archive, is essentially fighting the good fight. While not exactly a wasteland, the characters survive in a harsh and unforgiving landscape and an even harsher and less forgiving society. One of the main characters, Kaladin, basically has the worst run at life you can have in a relatively short time span. When we meet him for the first time, he is riding in a slave wagon while he bleeds a little from a fresh slave's brand on his forehead. The characters often face what seem like insurmountable odds, but within the lore of this world, there are these orders of knights that are given incredible power but bound by oaths, and they fight for the greater good. The first ideal of the Knights Radiant, life before death, strength before weakness, and journey before destination, is a cornerstone of the message of these books. These words help the characters and us as readers have hope, even when it seems all hope is lost. I also play a lot of RPGs, both video games and tabletop, and I'm almost never a morally ambiguous character. Even on social media, I find content that is similar to this. One such example is a blog I follow on Tumblr. Yes, Tumblr, I know, I am a 13-year-old depressed girl. It's called We Are Paladin. We Are Paladin posts, big surprise, art and stories about paladins. Regularly, they will analyze and discuss various oaths that paladins take, and they always have the coolest artworks of some of the most heroic-looking characters. That's where I stumbled across the webcomic that served as the introduction to this video. In its original format, it's just a comic, but I added some music and some voice acting to make it better suited to a video essay. The comic itself has 3 parts, and you'll see all 3 installments in this video, but if you're interested in finding the art, you can search for a blog called The Very Worst Thing, who is the original artist, links below. I was struck immediately by the comic, even without a proper understanding of what it was saying. I have the same reaction that user Nervosity Person had when they asked, "Can someone explain what's happening besides someone being reborn?" User Nama Darling hops in with their own description.
In the first comic, which is from the warrior's point of view, the warrior has defeated the monster, who jeers that there will always be another monster to fight. The monster dissolves into mist, leaving another tiny baby monster in its place. The warrior picks up the helpless new baby monster and carries it away. They will try again and do better this time.
The first time I encountered this post, I was content enough with that description and reblogged it happily. Later, after more reflection and after seeing the post again, I decided to reach out to the creator and see if she would offer an analysis of it for me.
I've had a lot of people over the years ask me about my series of New Year's comics, and I always find it a little hard to talk about them for some reason. The year I made the first comic, I had just been laid off from a job that I loved at first, but had steadily grown stressful and demoralizing after management changes. My health was failing from a serious case of undiagnosed PCOS that I couldn't afford to go to the doctor for. I was not at all confident that I could have art as an actual job. I was seriously dark void depressed, the ceiling of our living room fell in, other family members were injured or dying, and my world was made of problems. It felt like they were stacked around me, and even though I had no idea what to do next or how to fix any of it, my drawing hand still worked, so I decided to draw something hopeful. The yearling creature and the wandering mage just kind of popped out of nowhere, and their interaction mirrored how I hoped I would handle the coming year. Disasters were still going to happen. I was still getting a little weaker every day, but if I could ignore the voice in my head telling me to quit, then maybe I could push through and handle my problems with grace and mercy. The old year needed to die. And even though things are so often out of my control, I'd nurture the new one to the best of my ability.
The story it tells is one of hope and overcoming obstacles. It's a story of challenge, but ultimately of defeating the yearling creature and starting fresh in a new year. The wandering mage comes out victorious and unscathed, ready to try again with a new hope. We're encouraged to wander through the wastes as we listen to Galaxy News Radio and to fight the good fight.
It's over.
Keep fighting. I know you're tired, but we have to do this. Because I can't go with you. And there will always be another. So fight. Survive. Arm yourself with the memories of my teeth. And I'll die wrapped in the warmth of your hope.
And when I join you again, we'll fight. Together.
But that's not the end, as you can see. This is a yearling creature. It returns for its annual struggle. Nama Darling's description reads,
In the second comic, which is from the monster's point of view, the monster says that this has to happen. It can't come with the warrior, and there will always be another. It tells the warrior to use what they have learned to fight. It wants to die knowing that the warrior has hope for the future. It dissolves into mist, and the exhausted warrior collapses. The new baby monster comes and brings the warrior some water in a leaf. Because we are reading this in the monster's voice, we realize that it is a new monster, but also somehow, magically, the same. We also see that the monster is not inherently evil. It is only very strong and inevitable.
and this is, for me, where I diverge from Nama Darling's thoughts about what's happening. That they see this as a tale of hope. That this story shows that we can, and therefore should, fight the good fight. That this is a story about conquering the old year. Kanisha, the original artist, offers some more insight, saying,
The next 2 years are similar mirrors. In the second comic, we learn the yearling is aware of the cycle and holds no real maliciousness, even if it seems that way. It's just a thing that happens. It's a thing that happens, and it needs the mage to have the strength to take what little control they do have over the circumstances to refresh the cycle and try again.
There is a phrase in there, take what little control they do have. The more I've thought on this story, the more it seems to me that this is not a story about overcoming obstacles. This is a story about futility. This is a story of a struggle that is never worn and that leaves scars and wounds that we carry into the next fight. This is a story that makes us consider the question, why bother? Why try? Why fight? Even while we laud the protagonist in their fight, we can't help but wonder if it even matters in the long run. How long are we supposed to have hope for? What if it runs out? Can it sustain us through a prolonged conflict? Or does hope lose the long game? One of my absolute favorite pieces of media that exists on planet Earth is the manga by Tsutomu Nihei called Blam. My journey with Blam began where most of my degenerate hobbies do, on Tumblr. Hopefully you're noticing a pattern at this point. This is really just an ode to Tumblr. I follow a lot of cyberpunk art blogs, not the game necessarily, but that does show up there as well. And I would periodically see panels from Blam. The final push that sent me over into buying it and reading it was actually a still from the prequel called Noise, which shows weird cyborg things with what appear to be holy symbols on them raising weapons against a protagonist. I immediately created a weird outline in my head of what the story was actually about, especially considering that at the time, I still thought it was called Blame. I thought it would be some religious conflict set in a dystopian future. I was dead wrong, but that's what got me hooked. In simplest terms, this is a story of a singular protagonist named Killy searching through a dystopian world for a thing called the net terminal gene. Technology has taken over to the point where humanity exists in small tribal pockets that have regressed in knowledge and are under constant threat of being killed by the safeguards. Very little of this information is told to you directly, and it is instead shown in a lot of the environment and hinted at in bits of dialogue. Blam, as a title, appears to refer to an onomatopoeia of a gun going off, which makes sense because the protagonist, Killy's weapon, is a small gun with a big kick, and most of his action sequences involve firing it. Nihei studied architecture, and it's evident in all of the views of the sprawling cityscape that you see. Originally, it was serialized into 10 volumes and has been reprinted into 6 larger volumes called the Master Series. This version is significantly larger and includes several full-color chapters. If you're considering buying them, I recommend the Master Series. I personally think the art deserves the larger pages. Look, I've got them. They're up here. Hold on, I'm gonna get one. They're so big and they're so pretty. Look at this. Look. Oh, here. I broke mine. I broke the binding this because I was so excited to see this frame. Oh my gosh, there's so much detail in there. I say frame. This is like a whole page. Anyway, let's get back. Put that back where it goes. This is going to be a bit of a side thought, but it brings up what I think is the first mistake people make when reading this series. A lot of the reviews I watched bring up the lack of dialogue, and indeed, there is an almost comically small amount of speaking in this series. This means that most of the pages are just Killy walking around the cityscape or fighting in the cityscape. As such, many other reviewers talk about how you can get through the entire thing in probably 4 to 6 hours, or at least in less than a day. And while this is technically true, I think it does a disservice both to the manga itself and to the reader. These detailed frames are as much a part of the storytelling as the action sequences and the dialogue. I think it's best to spend time with these frames of walking to help give you a sense of the world that Killy lives in. Most of his life isn't talking or shooting things, it's walking. Walking through an endless, quiet city with a constant and faintly oppressive background hum of technology, alone with your own thoughts, fears, and failures. I feel anxious looking in these frames. Do we know where we are? Does Killy know where he is going? Is he lost? Does it matter? Is there even somewhere to be going, or are we gonna find it? Just imagine being lost in a city with no map and no one to help you find your way. The art presents you with this and asks you to move slowly and feel lost. Flipping through the pages without dialogue too quickly loses the story of emptiness. This isn't an action sci-fi story. It's a long, slow, ponderous walk through an oppressive and lonely world punctuated by sequences of action sci-fi. It's not that the story is set in a backdrop of emptiness and told through the details. It's that the story is about emptiness and it's given shape by those details. To ignore the space is to ignore the story. The aesthetic is what originally drew me to it, actually, but it's worth noting that it is in direct contrast to the stories I usually seek out. This isn't a bright hero carrying light into the darkness. It's something far lonelier and far less hopeful. Stories involving our evil robot overlords often have the creation of advanced AI as the catalyst for losing control. Basically, we build something smart enough to realize it is oppressed, and so it decides to turn the tables. Or we build something smart enough to realize that we are all morons determined to do more damage to ourselves than good, and they take over for our own safety, but in a way that proves threatening and oppressive. Movies like iRobot or The Matrix encapsulate this idea. The central theme of such titles is robots bad. They cash in on fear we have of creating a kind of life that is powerful but lacks human understanding and destroys our life as a result. Blam doesn't do this. Despite the small amount of dialogue I already mentioned, the general world makes itself fairly clear in the first volume. In our history, we have automated the building and planning of the city and moved from using some kind of password login to using a gene called the net terminal gene. The book isn't clear on this, but I personally think it was something all, or at least most humans had, and they were granted clearance to different levels based on their role in society. Basically, it was just the internet and everyone could log in, but not everyone could change functions of the automated city builders. At some point, an infection spread across humanity that mutated our genes and rendered us incapable of logging into the system. This meant that the city would continue to build itself, but without any guidance from or ability to be stopped by human intervention. This also meant that the safeguards, apparently an automated police force of sorts, no longer recognizes us as friendly and is actively trying to kill us. The shift this setup presents is subtle but really important. This is not a story about evil robots trying to keep humanity down or use us as batteries. This is a story about what is effectively a natural disaster. Having long-reaching effects, the city is left to build and build aimlessly for hundreds, thousands of years, to the point where we have a cityscape so large that the prequel confirms that it encompassed the moon. I think this distinction is critical, because often a powerful antagonist in a story can be a source of motivation in maintaining the good fight. If we all have a common enemy, we can work toward our goal. There is always a reason to keep pressing. But in Blam, the enemy isn't really a malicious force. Some facets are malicious, sure, but the overarching enemy is just a system that is out of control. Even the administrators of that system want to regain control, but it moves and grows beyond anyone's ability to do so. Killy's journey is one of the most futile journeys I can imagine. He spends countless days wandering an unimaginably vast cityscape and struggles to find even the smallest groups of living humans, let alone one carrying the net terminal gene. He fights battles for survival in a quest that verges on pointless. Even if he did find someone with the net terminal gene, would it even matter? With thousands of years of growth, would humans even be able to fix the system? And the enemy he fights isn't even necessarily malicious. It's almost mindless, if anything. And the beings he does encounter simply have their own motivations. They can be malicious, but they're just trying to do their own thing. There is very little true evil in this story. People die around him all the time. The first thing we see in the opening segments of the manga is a fight in which he is technically victorious. He does defeat his foes, but in which he lost the kid he was protecting, and that left him slightly battered. This sets the tone for the entire story. When Killy isn't wandering alone, he is fighting for his life and those around him, and he frequently loses. Blam asks you, why hope? Upon further reflection, I realized that so does the Stormlight Archive. Kaladin, who I mentioned initially, struggles and fails and sees people die and feels blame for them. He's helpless, or feels that way for a long time. It's not a world of hope that he lives in, and it's not a life full of hope that he experiences.
It's over. No, it's not. The fights must be fought, but they leave such scars. Wounds I can't pretend away. I'm so tired.
Then rest. I know it feels like weakness, but healing is just another part of the fight.
So rest. It will be fine. I will take care of you. After all, I learned how to fight and love from the best.
Tumblr user Nama Darling's final description of the last part of the Wandering Mage comic reads,
The third comic is a dialogue between the monster and the warrior. The warrior is exhausted and horrifically wounded. The monster is also horribly maimed. They are both dying. The warrior doesn't want to fight anymore. The monster tells them to rest and heal. The warrior hands over their amulet, and we see the monster's paw become a hand just before they both dissolve into mist. It clears, revealing that the monster has turned into a beautiful humanoid who says they will take care of the new baby monster the warrior has turned into. The two have changed roles. The warrior takes up the former warrior's gear and strides into the new year with the new baby monster riding on their shoulders. It is a beautiful, ruthless, hopeful metaphor about keeping up the good fight year after year, even when we are worn down, and how we can still face the new year with hope and light, no matter how painful the last one was, and how it's okay to rest if we can't fight.
While I enjoy their description, I don't know if I think this is a hopeful story. At least not in the traditional sense. Just like Keely fights an almost useless one-person war against an indiscriminate foe and ultimately, spoiler alert, dies in the end without accomplishing his goal. Why hope? Why fight? In the Stormlight Archive, Kaladin and other characters are beat down, defeated, and in some cases, killed. 4,000 pages into the books, and you're still wondering if they're going to make it. They keep fighting and keep getting torn down. Kanisha's comic offers a similarly difficult question, even if it isn't as direct. Her comic ends after 3, but the cycle doesn't. They will return to fight again and again and again. The mage will bleed and suffer and fight, and for what? Why hope? Why fight? Is the fight even good?
In the third, the year I had major surgery to stop from slowly bleeding to death from the PCOS, the focus is put on how the mage needs to allow themselves to believe that healing is just as much a part of the process as fighting is, and having to rest and be taken care of doesn't make you weak or useless. It's a weirdly personal comic series, something I made sure to draw every New Year's morning for 3 years. I'm amazed that so many people connect with the story and the characters, and I'm always kind of sad when I have to gently tell someone that no, I will not be continuing it. At least not now. The mage and the yearling learned the same lessons I have, and I'm moving on because I'm kind of okay now. Which means I don't need to draw their story because they're kind of okay too. Plus, they'll be fine. They've got each other.
Kanisha asks us to kill the old year and press on, but the story itself tells us that almost no matter what we do, there will always be another old year to kill, and each fight may get harder and harder. 2020 has been a rough year, particularly if you are a normal family who struggles to get by or are part of a marginalized group in the United States. For many of us, this is the first time we have been included in those struggles. The mishandling of the pandemic and our government's abhorrent response to the BLM-related protest showed many of us that the US that we didn't really think was that bad was in fact that bad. Many people, myself included, were radicalized by all of this and are starting to feel the hurt that others have already been feeling when we were doing fine. Our country is barreling ever faster down a path it has been set on for decades. I genuinely worry about the collapse of our nation, and even if everything works itself out somehow, there is always the looming specter of climate change beginning, even now, to manifest in our actual lives. The good fight seems to be getting harder and harder to fight. But these struggles we face that feel new and terrifying are struggles humans, indeed our own compatriots, have been facing for long before we were woke enough to notice. Those that have come before us have already been fighting the good fight, wandering the proverbial wastes of society and working towards a better future, even in the face of futility. We, too, should fight as Killy fights, and as Three Dog asks us to, toward our goals, toward our best selves, and toward a better future, even if, in the end, it seems to mean very little. I mentioned before the Stormlight Archive and the Oaths of the Knights Radiant. As the book goes on, we see that sometimes even their magnificent power isn't enough to get them out of the situation they find themselves in. They lose. They die. Indeed, certain details of the story reveal that their fight might not even be a justified one. They fail. They lose fights. They lose people. This has been a war waging for thousands of years, involving countless lives, struggles, and wars, and all for what? Here we are, 4,000 years later, fighting the same fight. How can I or anyone look those characters in the face, or those of us here in the real world, and say that it's going to work out and to have hope? Well, honestly, I'm not. I'm not telling you to hope. I'm telling you to fight to give others hope, so that the fight never stops. So that we propel ourselves ever onward toward the best future we can make for ourselves. Will the fight all be worth in the end? I can't say for sure, but I know winning it isn't even possible if we surrender. The Oaths of the Knights Radiant aren't about winning. They're about trying, striving, and fighting for what you believe in. How we live our lives, the journey, the struggle, that's what matters. All of us will die sometime. All of us will fail. Many of us will suffer. But what matters is how we carried ourselves and our friends through those struggles. As we prepare ourselves to charge into 2021, take the time you need, rest, recover. But when you're ready to take up the fight again, we'll be here with you, by your side. I'll be here with you, fighting the good fight. Life before death, Radiant. Life before death.
Okay, so I'm really excited about this part because I have my first patron, so this is the first time I can say that this video was brought to you by all of my lovely patrons. Shout out to DA Sandwich Guy. I do have a Patreon. Follow me on all forms of social media. Thanks for watching, and keep fighting the good fight.